another part of it is that what people don't understand about a motorcycle is that once you're up to speed, when you want to turn, uh, uh, if you want to turn right, say, you might imagine like on a bicycle, you'll just sort of turn. First, you'll start to lean to the right, and then you'll turn the wheel to the right, and it'll go to the right. And on a motorcycle, you could do that, but it's going to be pretty slow. You have to sort of lean and then sort of turn. But instead, what you actually do once you're up to speed is let me put my hands on, I just will put pressure on the, I can't tell whether you're seeing me the way I am, but this is my right hand. Um, and you'll put just pressure on this side. You're not going to turn the wheel to the left in order to go right. So I'm actually going to put pressure as if I'm turning the bike to the left. So let me give you an example. Sometimes I do a lot of sit-ups, let's say in CrossFit, and sorry, a lot of squats. So my thighs are killing me, and I don't want to lift up. So if I want to lift up my leg, it hurts too much my abs. So I have to actually physically lift my leg with my arms. That's the sign of my leg not being part of my own body. If you're moving, if you're using your arms to move something, turning on a faucet, well, if you're turning the faucet, that faucet ain't you.
I'm delighted today to be in the presence once again of the handsome and talented Mark Changizi, who is a brave thinker, I will say, and he's forthright. And I found him during the COVID dark ages, our mini ice age, I guess, of thought. And Mark is a real thinker, and he covers the waterfront. I'm going to let him self-declare some of his credentials and books and so forth before we get onto a conversation, which will go wherever we see fit.
Yeah, yeah. Undergrad physics, math, from PhD math, and I became, from a physics math kind of kid, I became a theoretical neuroscientist, evolutionary sort of biologist, and so I was at Caltech and doing theoretical neuroscience. I was at Duke sort of psychology department. I was at Rensselaer Polytechnic Department of Cognitive Science. I was a computer science professor in Ireland. And then about 15 years ago, I left academia to start my own companies. We sell sort of vein finder glasses and colorblind glasses and other kinds of companies, as well as writing a variety of books. My seventh book is on motorcycle mind, how you become one with the motorcycle. But other books have been why we came to have music and language, and why we see the way we do, why we have why we see illusions, why we have color vision. So there's a variety of different books, big grand unifying theories. But during COVID, I sort of came out of the academic department, keeping your politics tight. And I'm a libertarian, so I was considered a far right, evil, literally Hitler kind of guy in academia. But I said I can't keep my mouth shut, because all those on the right and libertarians were suddenly screaming for COVID mandates. And so since 2020 March, I sort of launched saying, like, I've got to start speaking out. So I became known to a lot of folks after that, not as an academic with sort of discoveries, but as someone who's sort of an academic freedom fighter, not your typical leftist academic type.
It's a lot of stuff there. While I have them in mind, I want to talk about motorcycle mind, but also the kind of libertarian aspect. Libertarian has the key word liberty, and liberal arts do too. This concept of the free man. The liberal arts, I think, come from Roman, and they wanted people who were the upper level of citizenry to figure out how to keep a society free, and so they gave them the liberal arts. And they would be able to think not just on a technical level, but think on the kind of the meta level, metaphysical and level of how to keep a society. So they had to understand rhetoric, thought, philosophy, how to judge and whatnot. And yet we have kind of libertarians who gave lie to their own terminology during COVID. I'm thinking of I always get his name slightly wrong, but Nicholas Nassim Taleb. How does his name go? He's wearing like triple masks. Give me his name.
Yeah, Nicholas Taleb. Yeah, there's
Not,
three different names, and I'd have to pull up my phone, but I'm using my phone to
yeah,
videotape
it's
it.
just Talib. Talib means student actually in
Yeah.
Arabic, and I think he's Lebanese originally. And student of what? So he writes all these Black Swan event kind of books, and I actually found them difficult and diffuse. I don't know if you've read them, um, and I was wondering whether everyone kind of claimed him a big genius, but it seems like his thoughts are muddied, and maybe he's just not during at least the COVID years he wasn't maybe getting enough oxygen to the brain through those triple masks, and he was proudly kind of the anti Changizi. Uh, on the airplanes proclaiming that kind of stuff. And to remain a libertarian seems to be a hugely crazy thing if you don't understand the basic concepts and precepts thereof. And the kind of standard of liberty is you have the right to wave your arms, but you can't hit anybody else. But to misconfigure like what the dangers are from other people during something like a relatively simple thing that we've had many times before, like a viral respiratory illness, seems to be a kind of a misjudgment of science, and maybe kind of under the Gelman amnesia precept, you have to wonder what his other bad thoughts are as well. I don't know if you have
Does
any
he? Did
comments
he
on that.
even? Does he think of himself as a libertarian? I didn't even know that.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because
We,
he
we'll
certainly
have to
didn't.
we'll have to spare that unless we want to pause and
Yeah,
research, which I'd rather not.
yeah, yeah.
I don't work for. I work with Jeffrey Tucker on Brownstone.org, and he was kind of the rare libertarian. And I'm not sure he's a libertarian right now, but you know, but that's been his legacy. Murray Rothbard and Ayn Rand and all that kind of stuff. From that kind of salon, he emerged, and hugely disappointed all the other libertarians. So we could maybe talk about libertarianism for a little bit, and I kind of want to talk about the motorcycle mind aspect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, was there a question in there?
Well, there's a question if you want to
Yeah,
talk about libertarians, but I'm kind of interested. We'll leave that lying for a second. But the motorcycle mind thing, I have not read your book, but I'm not a motorcyclist. I'm a squash player by history, although I'm kind of merging to tennis as my knees deteriorate. Um, but the difference between tennis and squash for me is the squash, I had kind of that motorcycle mind thing. I would just kind of get in that world where you're quick enough and fast enough. I was a pretty good player at the time, for somebody who didn't grow up doing it on the pro circuit, that kind of thing. For a novice amateur, I was a good amateur, and but I just loved that thing where you kind of like lose yourself and you're just part of this thing that's going on, and then you kind of suss out where the ball is going to be, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how close that aligns with your motorcycle thoughts, but maybe you can talk about some of those things, how that what that is for you, kind of the merging of mind and machine.
yeah. Uh, there's, I mean, the whole book is about this. There's several different chapters, but one of the facets of it. So another facet is sort of how your emotional expressiveness that you do with your gestures and your face actually comes out through the sounds of the bike by virtue of the fact that you have a manual transmission. And this is true for all manual transmissions, but motorcycles are inherently manual transmission. So you're actually, every time a motorcycle goes by, it's interesting. You want to turn, you want to look, and if there's a bunch of them, they're emotionally evocative. They're interesting to look at it because they're signaling their emotional expressiveness through the sounds of the bike. And you have a two-dimensional space. In fact, it's more than two-dimensional space, but it's the same two-dimensional space that we have in our emotional expressiveness. Um, but so that's one whole chapter on that, and that comes out of my previous book, Expressly Human, as grain unifying theory about what emotional expressions are for. So, um, but another part of it is that what people don't understand about a motorcycle is that once you're up to speed, when you want to turn, uh, uh, if you want to turn right, say, you might imagine like on a bicycle, you'll just sort of turn. First, you'll start to lean to the right, and then you'll turn to the wheel to the right, and it'll go to the right. And on a motorcycle, you could do that, but it's going to be pretty slow. You have to sort of lean and then sort of turn. But instead, what you actually do once you're up to speed is let me put my hands on, I just will put pressure on I can't tell whether you're seeing me the way I am, but this is my right hand. And you'll put just pressure on this side. You're not going to turn the wheel to the left in order to go right. So I'm actually going to put pressure as if I'm turning the bike to the left. I'm doing this is called counter steering. And people think, oh, you turn the steering wheel to the left and it goes right. No, you're not turning it. You just put pressure as if you imagine that it's the neck of a horse and I'm just touching it, like I'm giving it a little signal, go to the right now, which is in fact what you do when you're riding a horse. You just pull on that rein a little bit, you just tug it. You're not turning the head. You just tug it, the horse knows, and it goes to the right. You're effectively doing the exact same thing, except that you actually push on the right side to let it know, which would actually turn the bike left if you kept doing that. But then it knows, and it actually suddenly leans and goes to the right, the wrong direction. But there is no brain reacting like a horse does that says, oh, he's signaling to go to the right, and so I'll now start leaning and doing all of these maneuvers. It happens for free from the physics and the complex dynamics and the gyroscopic stuff. It comes for free at those scales once you're up to 15, 20, 30 miles per hour and beyond. And so you end up with a bike that's 600 pounds, and you're not putting any pressure. Your grandma can be on there and just put a little touch. Go this way. The whole thing will lean. It'll stay leaned at 30 degrees, and just for nothing. You're not, and yet it's magically at 30 degrees. If it was 30 degrees and I was holding still, I would be at all the effort that I can just to get it back up right again. But at speed, it just stays there and holds, and then you can just sort of unpressure it to say, okay, never mind. And it'll just right it back up again. And so this touch sensitivity, and you can do this in a car. Cars are not like this. In order to make your car move, I actually have to turn the steering wheel. You could make it instead so that the steering wheel never moves. And if I want to go right, you just sort of push a little bit of a sensor you just push, let's say, on the right-hand side, and there's a sensor, pressure sensitive pad that then sends electric stuff to the wheels to turn right if I just push a little bit on the right side or the left side. You could do that. But that's not the way it is. And if you did do that, of course, there'd all be all this electronics. There's no electronics that's doing this. It happens for free at speed. And the reason this is more like what it becomes your body is because, so let me give you an example. Sometimes I do a lot of sit-ups, let's say in CrossFit, and a lot of squats. So my thighs are killing me, and I don't want to lift up. No, squats. Sorry. So if I want to lift up my leg, it hurts too much my abs. So I have to actually physically lift my leg with my arms. That's the sign of my leg not being part of my own body. If you're using your arms to move something, turning on a faucet, well, if you're turning the faucet, that faucet ain't you, because you wouldn't have to use your arms to move it if it was part of you, to turn a doorknob. All the things that we do in life are when we use our bodies to make those things move, it's because those arms are not our bodies. When we make my own leg move in normal circumstances, when I'm not injured, it just rises. I don't use a body part to move it. So the same thing happens when I'm holding the steering wheel. I don't have to go on a steering wheel in a car. I actually have to turn the car right. I actually have to physically rotate my arms. That's not what you do if it was my own body. But on a motorcycle, you don't move. You're absolutely still. You just put a very slight pressure, like you can't. There's no movement, just pressure on it, and the whole thing goes whoa like this. This is the sense. One of the multiple kinds of different dimensions in which a motorcycle at speed becomes really an extension of your body, and it's because of this kind of physics that happens. It doesn't really matter what the physics. A lot of people try to explain what the physics is. That's sort of irrelevant. What's relevant is that kind of dynamics that makes it part of your body, and then there's no emotional part of it as well. So those are the kinds of things I talk about and try to take seriously as a neuroscientist, evolutionary biologist, what it is, and as someone who has experience, on books like Vision Revolution and how we came to have music, all of these sort of serious discoveries that I've made about the UX experience, how language and music and art has evolved, culturally evolved to fit us. So now the question is, how is it that motorcycles have co-evolved sort of to fit our neuroscientific capabilities?
Yeah. Well, so obviously they haven't co-evolved. I mean, there
Not
are
co
things,
well, no, this is all
there are
cultural
physical
evolution
phenomena out
fitness. Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And we didn't evolve to become part of motorcycles and whatnot. So a couple of side questions as you're talking. What if you're on the motorcycle and you sneeze? I mean, you have like a little spasm or whatever, twitch, or God forbid you're Michael J. Fox or a little bit of Parkinson's and you got some kind of spasm, whatever. Is that going to ruin your can you have to be able to be at one with the motorcycle to be a motorcyclist? I'm not. I've only ridden on a motorcycle like once or twice in my life, and not probably at the speed you're talking about. It was a teenager, but on the other hand, I've kind of like I scooter around town on a push scooter, not electric, and I ride bicycles. I have electric bike, all this kind of stuff. So I'm familiar with phenomena. I used to ride bikes a lot, but when you talk about the co-evolving part, I mean, is this something that we kind of have a little lacuna? We have a vacuole in our brain ready like a USB slot ready for this kind of thing, pre-mixed, whatever that we're supposed to be doing this kind of stuff, and if so, why, and if
Well,
not,
I
what's the
mistake.
merger?
This is not coevolution, as you say. This is culture. All of these sorts of arguments about how we came to have language and music and writing are cultural evolution to fit our invariant instincts that we already have. But one of the things that I think that it taps into, um, when you know, Altered States was one of these movies from sort of our generation. I can't remember the actor's name right now. You go into a sort of a perception. All perception is gone, so you're just floating in a bath with all darkness, and then for some reason he would come out and he would be a quadruped, like a wolf, and going killing people at night. I didn't remember. So but there's a lot of other mythology, werewolves themselves, where a biped like us suddenly becomes a quadruped and has the ability to move like a wolf or a deer or a horse. And so we have a lot of fantasies about moving in that way, because we just don't have the ability to have that kind of speed and grace. And on a motorcycle, what you do once you become one with it, if you think about what a dog or a horse is doing, their front two in fact, what your legs are doing are effectively you as a biped are in some sense a unicyclist, because or one of those electric unicycles where each of your feet is sort of the opposite ends of a single wheel. It's like a poor man's wheel. It's in fact a very sophisticated kind of wheel. Boom, 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 boom. But for a dog or a horse, you've got now two wheels. You've got the front 2 feet, which is acting like one wheel, and they're kind of hitting usually directly in front of each other as well. Boom, boom, and same for the back. So you really have a variety of a bicycle kind of configuration when there's a quadruped. Or another way to say it, when you're riding a bike and riding a motorcycle, I would claim is exactly giving you the experience of what it's like to be a quadruped, like mammalian quadrupeds. And that is what's so beautiful about it. You have an entirely new physics and experience and speed, exactly like pretty much all the other animals have, all the other mammals have, and we have sort of never got to appreciate. Now, that's one of the brilliant things about it.
Well, I think we're faster than some mammals. Um,
Yeah, there are some, but even some fairly insignificant. Even your most pathetic dog can usually outrun us.
well, yeah, they can outrun us. I mean, I've got a physics friend who thinks our miracle talent is literally our running ability. But for distance.
Distance, yeah, for distance, right? Although
Uh,
dogs can still usually outrun us.
so what's the evolutionary benefit of having this ability to run for distance?
Oh, yeah, I do not have a standard theory. I think the going theory is that we would have been hunting, potentially just running down prey. But I'm not sure if that's a good explanation or not. That's
Yeah, I mean,
just
they probably have more shorter bursts. Maybe we tire them out somehow. Um, I mean, it's all kind of very interesting stuff. Um, I mentioned to you once before, this color field aspect. How did you get into that per se? You're not colorblind. I was thinking, frankly, every day when I'm in the garden, I think that the tomatoes self-declare, at a certain point that we're ready, we're sweet, they turn red. Otherwise, you can't really see them in the garden. Like every day I come out there, it's this time of year, it's harvest season, and I'm finding tomatoes in places I didn't realize I had them because a lot of them are cherry tomatoes. They're small. They've kind of interdigitated with some of my other bushes and whatnot. So there's all these like fibrils, tendrils, or whatever they are of plant. And I'm like, oh, there's there's a tomato. I didn't even know there was going to be one there. Um, so what's the are people who are color red green deficient deficient in any way? And what about full color blindness? And what's the biologic benefit? According to like the sickle cell theory, there was some inherent aspect of being what is the word? Not full sickle cell, but partially so. They were protective against malaria, or whatever. So the gene persisted. Any thoughts about color blindness? How it came about? What are the protective aspects for being heterozygous, if that's the term, for color blindness, whatever, without having full aspect?
yeah. Well, for 100 years, the scientific community had thought that the reason that we primates have red-green vision and the other mammals don't. The other animals, by the way, they have sort of black-white. They have grayscale, and then they have yellow-blue, sort of two dimensions, black and white, and all the grays in between, and then yellow, blue. So it's a nice two-dimensional palette. But some of us primates developed a third dimension, red, green. Now, in the environments where there are tomato-like things, there's lots of animals that are not primates that also eat those fruits, and they're fruit, and they don't have red-green vision at all. So they can still typically sense them, because in order to be not sensible to them, it would have to be that they're going from green with no variation, with green to red, but with no changes whatsoever along a blue-yellow axis or a grayscale axis. That it's utterly invariant along that axis, which is not usually occurring. So there's plenty of them that still seem to be able to find them. But nevertheless, for 100 years, the going theory was, okay, primates evolved to be even better at finding fruit. But the problem with that argument was, what we primates have, so bunny rabbits and dogs and all of the animals that you've ever known that are mammals have one low wavelength sensitive cone and then one middle wavelength sensitive cone. That is, so it's sensitive to about 450 and 550, roughly speaking. Now, your RGB cameras have another run around 650. So there's sort of three spread out uniformly across the spectrum. Now, what we primates, we had a third cone, a third sensitivity to the wavelengths, but our third is like right next to the other middle wavelength one, or maybe for the cameras it's like this. So it's really weird. Instead of being uniformly distributed, it's like right next to each other. And it's the same for all of the primates with color vision. Whereas when you look at the primates, they have, in the environments where you find them, there's massive diversity in the kinds of colors of fruits and things like this that are edible. So why would you have this invariant one kind of red, green, weird, peculiar kind of color vision for massively diverse environments where there's no regularity at all? And so I was able to show that, in fact, in order to, my hypothesis was this, is that it's not having anything to do with fruit. It's in fact an empath sense, the ability to sense emotions and health and state on the bare skin of others. So it turns out when you get more oxygenated and less oxygenated, your blood gets more oxygenated, less oxygenated, then that's only visible by virtue of how the hemoglobin spectrum changes. And it turns out the hemoglobin spectrum is a particular kind of shape, but when it's deoxygenated, there's this part of it that's kind of like a U in the middle. And then when it gets oxygenated, that little U area becomes like a little W instead. And it turns out in order to sense it turning from a U to a W in that middle region, you have to have two sensors right there where the middle of the W goes up and the other thing goes down. That's the only way to sense it. And our cones, our middle wavelength sensitive cones, our M and L cones, are exactly in the spot that allows you to sense the peculiar spot that allows you to sense the oxygenation of hemoglobin changing to be more or less oxygenated. So it's exactly the empath sense kind of color vision that we primates evolved. So I showed this in paper in 2006. I guess it's almost 20 years ago, and I talk about it a lot in this book, Vision Revolution, Chapter 1. So that's the hypothesis, and there's a lot of other predictions that came true out of it. So, for example, the primates, um, on this in this way of thinking about it, color vision, by which we mean red-green three-dimensional color vision, is one side of the coin, and the other side of that same coin is being naked, right? Because the other primates that don't have color vision, and your typical mammal, there are counter examples like hippos and that are naked for other reasons, but the typical mammal's furry all over as the baseline sort of expectation. But but some of us primates like us and other ones we think about, they're naked in either their face or their rump or potentially all over. And it turns out that the primates that have color vision have naked rumps, naked faces, sometimes naked chests that they're signaling. And the primates that don't have red-green color vision are furry like your typical dog, right? So for example. Now, as for the other question that you asked, you said, well, it is true that there's more color blindness amongst men than women. So 9% of men are severely color deficient. Practically no women are color deficient. It's like point. It's
Well,
a
yeah,
very fraction percent.
it's excellent.
Yeah. And also amongst the new old world primates, of which we're one of them, we all have the exact same kind of color vision. But amongst the new world primates, it turns out there's three different varieties of color vision, and they're all pretty good and pretty sensitive to this oxygenation. But it turns out none of the males have color vision amongst the New World primates. So there's, again, in both cases, it's as if there's still some selection pressure for some of them to not have color vision. And when that happens, it seems like there's maybe more selection pressure for males. So I don't have a great answer, but other hypotheses that come up. Emotion sense but it's also a state sense and health sense. And mothers, when you're raising babies, and they're mostly the moms, I don't know if you've ever, when you had a baby, every time they clench, just to poop, their whole face changes instantaneously, right? And so if a mother is breastfeeding or any kind of, you're able to sense the state of the baby instantaneously. So it could be that the selection pressures for females were higher because of just raising children, as one of potential many differences for why an empath sense mattered more for females. But of course, it's not just women, not just females. So there is some differences, but that's the basic idea. It's an empath sense. We really have an empath sense, the ability to read
So
other
should
people.
women avoid marrying men who are colorblind?
Well, the joke always is that certain men are autistic and they're just emotionally dense, but it could be that they're just colorblind. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So, I was thinking that the color aspect. We could touch on this or not, but kind of like the color panoply differentiation is biologic signaling as well. And I was talking about the graying that mammals get as a signal of a tithing, self taxation to the predators. That this is the old person, whatnot. Um, this would be completely unrelated. Any thoughts on that at all?
Well, I thought about things like that before. My own hypothesis, which I've never tested, but my going always, the typical predators that matter most in human ancestral lives were other humans that were going to kill them. Those were the ones the most dangerous. So my own thought was that, I think one's layman intuition is that we get gray because at some point we get old, and then we're unable to keep it colored. But another kind of hypothesis, which was mine, has been for 30 years, was like, no, it's probably the case that at some point the body decides, okay, now is maybe a time to no longer keep it colored of whatever it was, and we're going to purposely let some gray happen, and that serves some kind of function. And for me, my hypothesis, but it signals other people in the tribe that I'm no longer actively a threat trying to have sex with the ladies or whatever. I'm past that. I've already I'm yes, I'm in this kin selection stage. I'm trying to make sure that my children or my sister's kids or whatever are, I'm not active anymore, and that it might then make me less likely to get beaten up or killed by the ones that are actively trying to be the
Yeah,
ones to. So
yeah. Well,
that was my thought. Yeah.
the other animals go gray as well. We don't they don't see it as much in the wild because they don't get old as often as we do. We have old age homes, and
Yeah.
raccoons don't, and whatnot. They tend to have a self selection of not aging. They get caught by some other animal when they get older. They can't run as fast and whatnot.
Yeah, well,
You know,
that's the prediction here would be, because a lot of those animals that you're talking about are highly social as well, but would be find the ones that are the more social that they are, or categorizing them as highly social versus intermediate social versus not social at all. Is there any evidence that the ones that are not social at all, in fact, signal less gray and they just die with a fully great mane of hair? Because there's no one to signal to, no conspecifics to signal to, and but that would then, if that was wrong, then it could be that your hypothesis is right versus the null hypothesis, which just this: as you get older, it just has trouble keeping up. I mean, it would be,
yeah. So while we're on this kind of bio theme, I'm always mystified by this kind of the gender stuff. Um, Charlie Kirk, late and lamented and incredible man. We'll try to get to him a little bit later. Was asked about gender. He was on all the campuses. This is, kind of like the major kind of friction point, it seems. And obviously, was the inflammatory part for his killer. And he said there are zero genders. There's not it's not a thing. Gender is a concept. It's a kind of like in the academy, and it's stems from like the sexologist McKinsey and John Money was a horrible pervert and whatnot, and they're two sexes, and that's that. And but the funny thing is, we actually have the greatest sexual dimorphism of practically any animal on Earth. We devote incredible energy and biologic capital in having the sexes look different. A female, pick your animal. I don't know, raccoons. We're talking about raccoons. Female squirrel, I can't tell. Dogs. I've got a dog on the porch right now. I couldn't really tell.
And
Without hearing.
yeah, and parrots, and a lot certain birds, but parrots especially. Like a lot of birds are really dimorphic, but parrots, it's practically impossible. You have to do genetic
Yeah,
tests,
and
or
I hope and trust they can figure it out to make
yeah,
more parrots and raccoons and whatnot. But we take biologic energy and we devote it towards, in the woman, more than the man, extraneous objects in a sense. The female breast form. Chimpanzees have flat chests. Women, they might get a little extra tissue when they're lactating, but our women have full rounded, fatty, composed breasts, which are clearly visually appealing, and the whole kind of shape, the woman shape, is there. And there's a lot of kind of biologic energy devoted to that. It takes away from some speed. It takes away from, I don't know, maybe you can't swim as fast, jump as high, all that kind of stuff. So you're investing in, putting some of your chips on the table from being strong or fast or whatever into this concept. Well, I'll just, for better want a better term, called beauty and attractiveness and mating and whatnot, and maybe long-term mating. And yet we're confused. It's just kind of a funny thing. Raccoons are probably less confused. They don't. I'm sure they don't have any Charlie Kirks or the need for anybody on their campuses where raccoons hang out and get educated and whatnot. But none of the animals seem confused about this topic, yet we are. But it just seems kind of flying in the face of the fact that literally we are pretty much the most sexually different mammals around.
yeah. No, that's a nice contrast to make. Look, my opinion about these sorts of trans and those that become trans. There's a long history in human tribes of having irreversible body changes, sort of surgeries, body modifications done, and irreversible. Doing any kind of membership in a particular socio-political community, you often have to declare not just a signal. It has to be a weird signal or a random signal, often a self-harmful signal or an absurd. It has to be something like this. And if you're really showing membership, you modify your very look to that I'm truly a member. I've gone through some kind of process that really shows that I'm a member. So you'll see people with the big ears or the rings across their necks,
Yeah, I
etc.
remember
And
those.
you can go on and on with the kinds of varieties of things, and then tattoos all over the say the biker clubs and the gangs and things like this.
Well,
The trans community, when you it has all of these same sorts of properties. They're undergoing irreversible body modifications as a signal of political membership in the progressive club, and it's a very strong political signal, and it's irreversible. So it shows, and notice they don't want to pass, by which I mean really go undetected as women. Truly 100. There's a few that truly want to go undetected, and then you'd never know whatsoever that they're in fact a man. It's practically impossible. There was a few cases of people, but they typically don't want to, because that would vitiate, that would ruin the whole point, which is a signal that I was once a man, I am now a woman. But this whole process and the irreversibility of it, and my signaling it, how crazy it means I'm an amazingly truly righteous member of this political club. And this is standard human behavior. This is not new. It goes back. What's new is that folks that are not, and I mean, well, I guess it's not. What's weird is that you have doctors who were also progressives, who then post hoc created justifications for why this is in fact healthy and good, and you have to do this, and the standard protocols of medicine should do this. But that's actually, even those other tribes typically would argue, they usually start as membership signals, but then it becomes justified, like wear a mask in April and March of 2020. But 2 months later, then suddenly there was 1,000 observational studies justifying why it's good to wear a mask, whereas there was no evidence, and they even said not to. Memberships become post hoc justified by the communities through lots of argument and selection, and these are good arguments in the sense that they spread like memes through minds, but they're all post hoc bullshit, right? So post hoc bullshit will start to rise up, saying why having 100, whatever, 16 necklaces up extending your neck isn't just showing membership, but it's actually good. And here's the reasons why it's good. I don't know what the reasons are, but the communities will typically come up with post hoc justifications for why it's a good idea and it's helpful. And lots of narratives about why it's helpful. And then, of course, it becomes a purity test. You either You either have to do it yourself to be a member, or you have to then say the right kind of pronouns and respect their pronouns to show that you. And it's complicated to get it right, even if you were trying to trick it, trying to sneak your way into the community. This is what DEI is. In order for me to become a professor again at a normal university, I have to write an essay. I would have to write a DEI essay showing, which I remember I had done back in even the 2000s when I was applying for something, and I talked about how I was Iranian and I don't really look Iran, whereas my sister does. So I didn't really have any problems. But I know I tried to create some essay creatively, but no, you're not supposed to do that. If you're going to do a DEI essay, it has to hit certain kinds of verbiage that you're supposed to repeat and parrot to show that you're a member of that cult. And I don't know how to do it because I'm not a member of the cult. So again, membership signal becomes a virtue signal, becomes a political purity test that folks within the community have to parrot or signal in order to become part of it. Trans has all of these things.
Yeah, it's funny. Iran, speaking of, my understanding is that, the Islamic Republic of Iran, they don't really care about the Iran part, or Persia, whatever. It's really, it's its own kind of membership cult. And within Islam, there are certain aspects of these kind of body changes. I think they have circumcision as well. And, there's all this kind of the self-flagellatory aspect. Depends on which branch we're talking about, whether it's, I'm not an expert, but, I've seen kind of these rites where people are taking, kind of whipping themselves and chanting and whatnot. And there's clearly, certain body changes that happen, maybe not physically to the body, but, the cloaking of the body, all this kind of stuff, and clear differentiation. It's power structure. It seems to be a growing club, but it's actually, they're speaking of clubs, that the club view if you're not part of that. And as far as Iran, I don't think they really care about kind of the native history of the Persian, Farsi, whatever people who were there. They want to obliterate all that stuff. It's similar to the Taliban blowing up the what are those big sculptures, whatever, the Bamiyan sculptures and whatnot. It seems like there's one sect that will supersede another. The interesting thing about the trans, just going back to them slightly, is that they are not forming their own society per se. They're interdigitated within a society, and that's maybe a little different permutation of some of these tribal aspects, which tend to be more, kind of with a self-contained unit.
Well, it's a good question. I suspect uh, one of the reasons you need to be able to have a membership signal that has the properties of a membership signal, being either weird or random or self-harming and so forth, is because there are people not in your community that you're signaling to. Otherwise, there'd be no. I mean, if it's really just you and your third cousins that you've all been interbreeding with for hundreds of generations, there's no one to signal membership to. It's only when suddenly you realize, oh crap, there's a lot of other people in all these nearby islands of the same archipelago, some of who want to kill us, and we have to start. There's a lot of then selection pressure to start creating cultural structures that signal membership and so forth. So I would bet most of these membership signals in anthropological cases, there's always others that they're signaling to.
Yeah, I think it was, it might have been Andrew Schultz, comedian, if not him, somebody like him, apologize, who was talking about, the Ukraine invasion, whatever, kind of the differentiation, Ukrainians, Russians, I mean, same basic people. The Russians are the Kievian Rus, and came from Kiev and migrated up, and there's some Viking mix, whatever. So the peoples are, they pretty much speak the same language. They have pretty much the same religion, pretty much the same looks. And so and they're battling each other. And he was pointing out, well, that's fine, but there's geography there. But what happens when China, mainland, PRC China invades Taiwan, and we're gonna let's say we come in and we try to figure out who's who. It's like it's kind of the old joke that we think Chinese all look alike. I'm sure they don't see it that way. But what's going to be the differentiation? How are we going to tell? Do you have better shoes? You have one type of computer chip versus another. I'm like, there's got to be some aspect to it. I don't know if that holds any interest for you at all, but we wind up having these differentiations, kind of parsing things, all the time. We never kind of form, one unity. It's like, that's redundant, a unity. E pluribus unum, out of many comes one, but it seems always, kind of like a building castles in the sand. You build it up and it gets washed away to a certain extent.
Yeah. Were you going to come back to Charlie Kirk? I guess it was
Yeah,
looping back in
well,
that direction.
let's do that. I mean, you can have let's hear your thoughts on this whole episode, kind of in a public facing way. I mean, what's the kind of, I mean, we are, I think, pretty clear on the facts, although people want to blur those from time to time. What's your kind of take in a political, social way?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be said here, but on the, it's been frustrating to watch. Well, it was appalling, but not exactly surprising to see the number of those on the left who were not just keeping their mouths shut, which is all they need to do. If they were not, they were not that sad about it, fine, just keep your mouth shut and just let it pass. But instead, they launched out in a celebratory way about how excited they were and how proud and how just amazing, just ecstatic, right? What that shows, and notice how similar that was to the way that the Jew hatred exploded by the end of day on 10/7. When there's a humiliation of your enemy, you don't suddenly get all this PR that's good for the humiliated. What in fact is that the other side feels empowered and explodes in confidence. And then there's lots of people who are on the fence and say, oh, I'm going to go with the strong horse, the one that's just humiliated the other guy. So there's this explosion in both cases of all of these progressive leftists who hate the right, and maybe even new haters of those on the right because of the humiliation of the right. That is, one of their guys, a very vocal guy, was he wasn't hit by a bus. There was no accident. It wasn't someone on the right, which is, I don't think they ever truly believed it was someone on the right that shot him. If it was someone on the right that shot him, it would have been probably, it would have just been just another crazy situation where there's, okay, another crazy guy, just like the guy who shot at Trump, just some crazy guy, right? But if it was some crazy guy that just shot at him and happened to kill him, there would be no reason to be celebratory about it, because there's no winning, there's no gotcha. It would be like, no one's doing a gotcha if he just gets run over by a bus accidentally. It wouldn't have been a big story. Like, well, that sucks, whatever. But it's a gotcha, and it makes them rise up. Just in the way that Hamas humiliated Israel, and it did. It was that massacre was a PR boon to the progressive left and to the Israel haters, right? So when you see them rising up like that, that means that they truly believe that someone on the left who hated Charlie Kirk for the same reasons the progressives hated him did it. All right, we took him out, which is why they rose in the way they did. So, of course, that's an appalling thing that we watched, but we're not exactly surprised. But what's interesting, again, is to see those sorts of reactions, to remind yourself that what creates explosions of hatred is not because Charlie Kirk did something hateful, or what that Israel eventually responded and retaliated with. No, it was way before it has nothing to do with it. It's because of the humiliation itself that brings out the crowd and makes them rise up and hate you for your own humiliation, right? So that's the first thing that we watched. But then the second part of this was watching the right suddenly go in cancel mode and try and actively say that it's okay to now go cancel, 1,000 people who are just regular folks in their lives. You're not talking about Jimmy Kimmel, just regular folks in their lives doing cancel mobs. And each one of them is saying, well, this isn't a cancel mob. They are terrible people, and I don't want them anywhere near medicine or my children. This is exactly what the left has been saying for 30 years. They think we're literally Hitler. So of course they don't want us near their patients or their students or their children, because they think that we're literally Hitler. They have their own arguments, or whether it was COVID, they didn't. I was arguing against masks. We were all arguing against the seriousness of COVID. We were putting society at risk. We were literally potentially actually dangerous to society. That was their justification. Of course, they were wrong and we're right, but you can't use the fact that I think that we're right and they're wrong to justify cancel mobs. Because just to be clear, a cancel mob is not just free speech. A cancel mob is getting Judy fired, not because the CEO or the boss thinks that Judy did anything wrong. The boss just wants the PR nightmare to stop. That's it. Because if this is, I'm sorry, Judy, but I got to get this PR nightmare to stop. You're getting fucked. I'm getting fucked. they're fucking you. I'm really see you. You know, that's all that's happening. It's not by virtue of having defeated the argument. It's all that it does is now make the rest of the community keep their mouths shut, right? And then they go into their own little communities where they still talk and they still do the same stuff. And but now we can't hear them, and now we have no interaction with them. So our social currencies are even more divergent, and so that they have no care about looking, doing embarrassing things. We want some kind of overlap so that our currencies have an exchange rate between them so that they care about getting humiliated in our communities. To the extent that they're more and more dispersed, they don't even care about the value of our currency relative to theirs because there's no crosstalk, there's no volume of exchange, so to speak. So it's counterproductive, and it's violating the very cancel culture hatred that the right has claimed to have for the last 30 years.
Well, I differ on some of this. I listened to Michael Knowles on this topic, and I don't know if you ever listened to him at all, but he spends pretty much a good half hour on this topic, and he quotes G.K. Chesterton. He says the only thought I'm against is the thought that ends all thought. And it kind of goes back to maybe 9/11, where people were wondering whether the Constitution was a suicide pact, whether you have any way of kind of proactively and prophylactically preventing mass attacks. And we have kind of an external ability to deal with terror. We can label Tren de Aragua a terror group and Al Qaeda a terror group, and we can go after them with all kinds of military manner. The KKK was a harder sell, and it's a harder thing to go at because of the posse comitatus rules and whatnot. We can't kind of have the military operating within on citizens and whatnot. But the differential is that they can say that my not wearing a mask is endangering them. That's obviously crazy because they're wearing masks. My not having a vaccine is endangering them. That's crazy because they're vaccinated. So their lunacy projection is different from the actual reality projection that people calling for the murder of somebody who's engaging and whose whole ethos.
Oh no! Well, look, if you're calling for the murder,
conversation.
If you're look, if there's a lot of incitement out there, and the incitement, I'm not sure the best way to go after incitement is with a cancel mob. The best way to go after incitement is with the police because that's a crime. Incitement to violence is a crime. And just like any crime, the best way to go about it is not to have a mob go after them because has its own problems. But these are crimes. But most of what we're talking about was not that. These are people saying yay to any kind of event. It is speech to say, I think it's good that, or I don't give a crap that. These are extremely callous, vile kinds of things to say, but they weren't incitement. Just saying yay or nay to an event is not incitement because if it's clear incitement, now of course there's a whole vague area whether it's but we have to have a high threshold for what we consider incitement because every side argues that no, actually this is a I'm censoring them for the justification of self-defense, which is why the masking or lockdowns, and they were violating lockdowns and then increasing the spread. So for my self-defense, I have to, it's okay to censor them. We need to have a high threshold. So maybe the current threshold is a little bit too high. Maybe it should be a little lower. There's a whole vague region. I don't know exactly where the line is. That's fine. But clearly incitement things should be a police matter. And I think if we just had the police and the FBI looking at all of the actual incitement, they'd be completely busy without having to go with a lot of these cases are just people saying vile speech.
Well, there's the murder aspect to it. So these people are kind of in line with murdering somebody with whom they disagree. And so, yes, you're talking about crimes. I think there's kind of a delineation of level of crime, but again, all they had to do, the essence of civilization is civility. And to be civil means you know how to shut your mouth at certain points. There's sometimes, you want to point out a deficiency, somebody's got lettuce on his teeth, you can point that out. You may not want to, scream, about how you want to kill all their co-religionists, that kind of thing. There are, I think not so gray zones. There was a nurse and doctor pair in Australia who were talking about how they want to, they would like euthanize, as it were, kill any anybody Jewish who shows up in their
Right.
hospital.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's kind of an essence where we put our lives on the line for people, whether it's in receiving food in the hospital, and security aspects in government and whatnot, where we are expecting the civility of civilization, which cannot exist without gazillions. That's a big number, but millions of people operating civilly. I go back and forth to work. I get in a car, and it's always been an amazing thing to me that nobody's really directing kind of on a global way where people should go and how not to hit each other and when to get off and how fast. I mean, we have a speed limit, we have exit sign. There's certain very passive rules that go on, but the fact that we don't like ram into each other, go on the wrong side of the highway on a regular basis, there's self-preservation and there's also civility. Now we see, the kind of the breaching and of this aspect by people on the left who have a violent tendency and don't do the conversation of Charlie Kirk and whatnot. Over and over again, it seems that the people on the right understand what the people on the left think because we think they're misguided and they think we're evil. So I think there's, if you have a javelin, you can poke yourself with one side as much as you want. It might hurt a little bit, but that's the blunt side. That's us. And you can poke your side. You take the other side of the javelin, you poke on it, and you'll kill yourself. It's pretty symmetric, looks very similar, but one side's dangerous and one side's not. And when the sharp point of the spear is up against your throat, in certain circumstances, you wonder. Ronald Reagan, when he got shot and quasi assassinated, he was a very light spirited man, and he goes into emergency room in Washington D.C., which is hugely democratic. I believe it was in Washington. And the first thing he said is like, the surgeon's going to take him in, Mr. President. Oh my God. He says, so how did you vote the last election? Are you one of me? Like, do you want me to live, basically? Now that's a joke, and he lived, and God bless him and all that kind of stuff. But we've come to a point where there's this kind of huge fracturing within society, which has like an unreality to it. All this kind of false labeling. Leah Thomas, only cut off the W, the I, and the L from his name, and probably nothing else to get Leah. Went from William to Leah, and that's the only thing cut off is 4 letters and nothing else, and everyone's supposed to acknowledge this. So over and over again, they seem to be operating under kind of this suppression of reality, and we are doing the opposite. So I think they're different ends of the sphere. I know it's hard to justify, and nobody would want to hear it, but I think that some of the ramifications that are happening in the private sphere, like, I don't necessarily mind, because it's like those are people who are actively condoning, actively promoting violence.
Well, yeah. Well, actively promoting is a different thing than yay or nay. Unfortunately, it could easily be. You've seen these videos of Charlie Kirk's professor, older guy, talking to his students, trying to get them to understand and just talk. And they're all just that, like almost all of them basically are glad that he died, and they're trying to be even a little bit careful about how they say it, but it's clear they're just happy that he's dead. They're glad that he's dead. The number of people in the United States that are glad that Charlie Kirk is dead could easily be 50 million people, and it could be that 40 million of them said something to that effect in a social media sense somewhere. We clearly can't be cancel mobbing them all and ferreting them all out and firing them. That's not the way. And then so the other part of this is that everything that you just argued, of course, is I'm on your side. I agree with all that stuff, but you have to remember, from the left's point of view, they have their entire complex narratives where they really believe that speech from the right is violence. Right? It's bullshit. It doesn't matter. But their justification is that speech is violence, and the arguments that they will give are not children's arguments. They're actually very
Yeah,
sophisticated
well,
bullshit.
that's sophism, which is
Right, but
sophisticated in some level,
all I'm
but
saying, but they're sophisticated in the sense that they work well in minds and they spread from mind to mind, very sophisticated way. These are not. So you could argue all day, and you're not going to corner them. They're gonna
I've done
sort it
it.
out.
Believe me, I've done it.
My point is, so they believe that speech is violence, and they're going to say just as an impassioned argument as you did, with some different icing on top of it about why, because I believe in the Second Amendment, or why I believe what I do about trans, or why what all these different things, I
Yeah,
shouldn't be allowed to be in these sorts of positions, and I'm uncivil and dangerous to society. That's exactly what they think. Now, to me, the most dangerous thing in societies is not authoritarianism from a centralized government. The most dangerous experience that any society has ever experienced. And we in the West, unless you were old enough to remember Germany, that we in the West experienced with COVID was bottom up authoritarianism. It wasn't the top down part, which was of course awful as well, but the scary part, which should have freaked everybody out, was like, holy crap, some middle-aged lady is attacking my entire CrossFit crew and screaming at us like she's our boss and she's going to rat to the state, snitch to the state about us just for being out there working outside. It was the snitches on the street, on every corner, ready to rat you out and cancel you and fire you. And none of that was
Well,
physical violence, but they were all going to they were all going to, there's a constant threat of a cancel mob going and ruining you everywhere. This is what it's like to live in Iran, what it's like to live in China, what it's like to live in Nazi Germany. Everywhere around you, there's also, it eventually becomes top down too, because the whole populace is demanding top down, which is in fact what happened in COVID. They're all snitching, and then suddenly the government says, okay, we've got to follow suit and look like we're
okay,
leading,
so
right?
I'm with you to a point. I understand the arguments, but some arguments can't be split down the middle, and you can't only always worry about what they're going to do when they have power, because they've already done all that crap. And I think you have to bring it back to the norm. There's an old joke. Hamas and the PLO. The PLO wants to push all the Jews out into the sea, and Hamas wants to torture them first. And the other part is the Jews and the PLO, whatever, Hamas negotiate. It's like we want to kill all the Jews, and the Jews say we all want to live. Can't we compromise? Kill half of us. So it's like there is right and wrong, and I think that the Charlie Kirk, in essence, I'm not sure where we all stand here on the deist lineage, but there's a certain aspect of kind of moral rectitude, and whether you're doing things correctly or not. And it's hard because people don't all follow the same religious code. But in the context of this country, it was founded as a Christian nation. There are certain concepts of what is the linear aspect. Now they can go somewhere else. Nobody's stopping people who want the Charlie Kirks of the world dead to go to Iran, and people who want Hamas to win to go to Gaza, and whatnot. People can vote with their feet, and there has to be some kind of like framework of what the game is you're going to play. I could probably beat you pick the chess champion, Magnus Carlsen. I could probably beat him in a game of chess, if I'm allowed to kick him, gouge his eyes out, slaughter him, turn the board over, or pour gasoline on him and burn him. But chess, those are not the rules. The violent sport like NFL or American football, there are people who literally could kill, could kill the punter. Punter is probably the smallest guy on the field. There are a bunch of guys there, either alone or in tandem, could kill the guy and prevent him from punting or kicking a field goal or whatever. All that kind of stuff. They have rules. So it's a violent sport, but they got rules, and there has to be some kind of concept of what the rules are. And I think it's a matter of again, I think we could do far worse than the Christian ethic that Charlie Kirk is espousing, that on which basically this country was founded in theory, not specifically in the Constitution, whatever, but amongst the states and whatnot, of allowing discourse and having various freedoms that were there that were endowed by the Creator, and that is kind of implicit in the governmental structure. Now, to the extent that I don't think there's any enforcement of how much people believe in God, but kind of absent this referee aspect, you will have mayhem, and that is what we see when instead of my being able to drive down the street, there are people burning tires in the street. There are people throwing rocks at the cars. That stuff is not allowed. Now, I understand we can generalize back, how much of those are bricks and how much of them are not. And whatnot. But that's for the people. I don't think every single person who said every single thing is going to be fired. But there are certain parts where you have to establish some kind of societal norm, and that's where the libertarian, kind of fades away to the conservative, and figure out what kind of things you're conserving, and whether libertarianism is just letting people do the things they want to do and hoping the invisible hand will work things out may not work in real time.
I'm not really sure there's a substantive disagreement here. I think it's riding on. There's a lot of the in my opinion the response, the only just response and the only helpful response, because otherwise it's counterproductive. The only response to speech is other speech. The problem is that there's a gray. As you get speech, and then more and more violence. Eventually, it's clearly incitement, and in some places clearly not incitement. And there's a whole range in between of a gray area, like every concept in English in any natural language. There's a gray area. Now, right now, there's just all kinds of stuff over the incitement line. In fact, lots of the stuff over the incitement line. Lots of stuff that's close to it. And then there was a lot of stuff that's just really vile things that were clearly not incitement, and they're going after all these. I think they just, if they went us at the stuff at the incitement line, there are plenty of people that they should go after, because those are the ones that are no longer speaking. They're involved in violence. Incitement to violence is violence. But again, there's a gray area, and I think you and I are only. I'm not sure we're disagreeing at all. I think there is no right answer to where exactly that line is, because that's the nature of vagueness, and the vagueness of all aspects of natural language. So maybe it should be a little bit lower. But even at a high threshold, there's so many cases all over the place of violence that's going unchecked, and it's being, because of a lot of the government is leftist. They excuse them. They excuse Antifa. They say, and then as soon as the right does one thing, like January 6th, which was like the most calm Antifa demonstration ever, relatively speaking, it's suddenly the worst thing that's happening in the United States ever. So they aren't policing their side. No one's been going after the left for their violence all of these years. So I'm fine with them going after all of these incitements, because that is violence. But as soon as it starts to get into pretty unclear or just vile speech, the answer to that vile speech is more speech, not cancel mobs, which are a variety of coercion, because you're coercing the boss to fire, not on the basis of the substance, but on the basis of the bad PR that will just keep on coming until they're fired. And that's exactly what we don't want, because that's the path that you've taught your own community. You've created a culture on your own side, which is okay with cancel culture. And cancel culture is exactly what you are trying to stop. When we win, if we want we want to win by, and everybody in our culture knowing that the principles of free speech are to respond to speech with speech, respond to incitement with calling the police, or potentially with self-defense, coercion. But that has to be a high line, because we're all biased to see incitement earlier than what is probably the case, because we're all just have that cognitive bias.
Well, I'm with you on that. We're kind of rounding out the hour. I'm gonna give you a chance to talk about the most pressing, aside from that issue of our time, which is Philly's Karen. Um, Did you see the baseball episode?
I did not. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Are you aware of Philly's Karen? She took the
I'm
ball.
not even aware of that. No.
Oh, okay. Well, we're gonna have to pass on that.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much. Tell us the name of your books again, and
Well, since we talked about we talked about motorcycle mind. So those that are interested in motorcycles or do motorcycle, this is a nice pairing with Zen, the motorcycle man. This really gets at why we ride, all right, here in this book. And since we talked about color vision, this book is the most relevant. This is a Vision Revolution, and it's a bestseller, and it talks about why we see illusions, how we came to why your eyes face forward. It's actually an X-ray you seeing through clutter in forests. It has nothing to do with predator and prey. And then it says color vision is an empath sense, and how we came to have writing looks like nature. And we've talked about that before on another show, actually.
well, thank you so much, Mark. Stick around for a minute afterwards, but we're going to say goodbye to everybody else. Thank you so much.
Great to be here.